nurse. And that was a 10-1 site. And so that's the first time I saw that split. I've said before that, you know, here in Travis County, we see progressives fighting progressives a lot. And I think in my race, what has been the most difficult is people who have supported me in the past, have given to my council campaigns, have publicly endorsed me, are now actively working against me in this campaign. And it has felt very, and I'll just be honest, because that's all I can be. You little brown girl, it's okay for you to represent the brown district. I represent the most Latino district in Austin. We're over 70%. And it has felt very, I was okay for me to do that, but then you shouldn't do anything more. And the experience thing has been used to delegitimize my campaign, my candidacy, frankly. And I'm happy to talk more about that, because what they have chosen to talk about is the side of my experience that I don't think matters to this position. Because what I think matters to this position is my policy experience and is my leadership experience and my reform experience. And we have defined this office a certain way for decades. And I think it's time to redefine this office and to have new leadership.
So I'm going to say a word. This word is a trigger word, but as I'm listening to this aspect of your story, I think about I refer as many people as I can to this NPR broadcast about respectability politics and having to present a certain image in order to accomplish an agenda. And it sounds like a lot of people who claim perfection and an ideal image expect you to embody that image also, which at some point, if you don't, shouldn't discredit your accomplishments, right? So it's just like I say quite often, and the podcast was from NPR's Code Switch, and that word abolish is such a big deal right now, because okay, you come from a 70-something% Latino district, right? Austin most definitely has its own drama with police brutality, not immune at all. Sandra Bland happened 2 hours from here, you know? So I'm really curious on your understanding of the definitions between abolishing the police and defunding the police.
Well, I've honestly heard different versions of both of those. And I think, and it really depends on who you talk to, their definitions of that. I could see where defund and abolish means essentially the same thing, because if you entirely defund a department, you've essentially abolished it. I think what I've heard the discussion be more of defund versus reimagine or reallocate is what I've heard. And it's all, the reasoning behind it all is the same, regardless of how, and that is, majority of Americans believe we have a police brutality problem in our country, in every community. And we have to rethink the way we have used our public safety as a response. And that sometimes does mean reallocating, because you only have a finite amount of money in a budget. There's, this will be my sixth budget as a city council member, and $4 billion of that is just the general fund. And so there is a finite, and I'm sorry, $4 billion is the whole thing, not the general fund, but the police make up a majority of the general fund. And
wait. I just want to make sure that I can clarify, my brain is tracking. You're telling me that the police budget of $4 billion is the majority of that.
So $4 billion is actually, so the general fund is the bulk of what is part of the $4 billion. I think the general fund is, not to check, I think it's about $1 million actually right now. And so it is the majority of that.
Okay.
The public safety is and police do make up the majority. Police is about $440 million. So yeah, the general fund is $1 million, but the entire city budget is $4 billion.
And that's why I want to make sure we get it right. Yeah.
So when we had, even before, this very important conversation and uprising that we're having, we've had discussions about more mental health officers. We've had discussions about, we have the host team right now where it is EMS people, with some police officers and mental health professionals trained, and they respond to, it's called the Homeless Outreach Street Team. And it started as a pilot project, mostly in downtown, and it has just been incredibly successful. And so I think we were able to fund another host team, but they're still just mainly downtown. There's been discussions of, we don't only have homeless people downtown, they're all over our city. And so there's been discussions on moving that. And so with this finite budget, where are we going to get the money to get the additional money for a more host team, or whatever that other thing is that we need to address some of these issues that we're having? And so I think the discussion specifically for police is, should we be spending money on militarizing our police officers? Should our police officers look like soldiers, in the military? Should they have all this heavy, essentially combat equipment? And then there's this, I could talk forever about this, sorry. There's this long discussion about staffing levels and what is an appropriate staffing level and what is the matrix you use. And one thing that often gets talked about is community policing. And so what we often hear from the experts is, in order to build better relationship and community building in the community, you need more community policing. And what that means is police officers have more time to get to know the people. So they have more of this off time. So then they created this equation. If we have this level of criminal activity and they're expected to respond and write the reports, and they still need this level of community policing, well, we need 200 more officers. And it was this continual cycle of, if you want more community trust, you need more police officers. And so we kind of kept, and this is before the 10-1 council, kind of kept feeding this oh, we need more officers. Oh, we need more officers. So we would hire more officers. Councils would sometimes go back and say, we need better training. We need bias training. We need better mental health. We need de-escalation training. And then we would hear, oh, well, we had this one class. We have this one, this 1 hour class in their, whatever, 6 weeks or 6 months of cadet class where we talk about de-escalation. And so now for me, it's this idea that we have to rethink all of this, the entire system, because it is not working. It is not working. We have not solved our homeless issue with laws and police officers. We have not solved poverty. We have not solved lack of access to healthcare and public health and mental health care. And so it's time to rethink that. And part of rethinking that is changing people's budgets. And so one example I've used just recently is our code compliance department. So somewhere, and I'm dying to do this research when I have time, somewhere we as cities decided that it is inappropriate to send a police officer with a weapon to someone's house because they're complaining about their neighbor built their fence too close, too much on my side, or you put a new roof on your building and you didn't have a permit. We decided that it was not an appropriate response to send a police officer. So we created a whole different department. We created code compliance. And really it's interesting because they dress a little bit like police officers, but they don't have weapons. And they, encounter situations that is kind of a right sizing, right? We're not sending police officers to that. And I think that's how we have to rethink about public safety. Is there are some calls, for example, your car gets broken into, people call 911 for that. Is that the best place for a police officer, a police officer trained in military tactics and, shooting and whatever, to send them to that? I think there's room to rethink how we respond. And then especially when it comes to mental health situations. I've heard some of the solutions being, well, we could have an iPad with a mental health officer. And if that's the only choice we have, I'll take it. But I think there's the opportunity to have mental health officers there and available. Because as part of my background, I don't know if everybody on the call, I was an Austin firefighter for 6 years. And so I have the utmost respect for police officers. And this conversation has been so hard for me because I have found myself feeling like I'm betraying people that I love and care about, who are police officers, because of the criticism that I've been making. And I've had to get to this place where these are the hard discussions that have to happen. And they have to believe that I still love them, but it's okay to want to rethink this. And every single one of them that I've talked to has said, you're right. We don't really want to respond to those type of calls. But that all being said, I have been at calls where, medical calls, where somebody's drunk in their room and the roommate calls and says, Jane says she's having a hard time breathing. They called EMS and they're drunk and they're acting a little bit, erratic. And then I don't know why police officers would get sent to these kinds of calls where the situation was under control. We were talking, being silly with the person and, getting them on the stretcher. And then a police officer would show up and it would be an entirely different scene. And even if the police officer wasn't doing anything to escalate the situations, just their presence sometimes would create this kind of reaction from people. And the one instance that I always remember is everything was going fine. We had the person on the stretcher. We were getting him into the ambulance. And when the police officer showed up, the person freaked out, and it ended with them being tied down to the stretcher and being taken to the EMS, tied down to the stretcher. And so, it's in rethinking this, we also have to realize that our police, we haven't trained them to deal with some of these situations. So it's everybody's fault, right? All of us have to take ownership of doing this wrong. And we have to admit that we haven't trained our police officers to respond to certain types of calls. So we have to rethink the training and rethink, even the recruiting process, right? Who are we recruiting for these types of positions? And so, sorry, that was a really long answer to your.
No, not at all. No, I mean, I obviously, these are conversations and questions that I have all the time. So, it's nice to listen sometimes also. But I think, when you talk about reimagining and restructuring or reestablishing a whole new institution, a lot of the conversation of this is because we've had to go backwards to go forwards. And, at the end of the day, through your experience, the thing I'm hearing is police officers their presence can be traumatic. Just their presence is traumatic. And when you have an understanding that someone's presence is traumatic, you don't bring more of that presence. You try to minimize that presence in order to help someone move forward. And I think the militarization of the police, just constantly reinforces, that impact, that trauma, this image. And it's just ironic you talk about community policing, and it's as someone who grew up in a certain kind of neighborhood, you don't want to see the police, period, because it's not for your benefit, whether it's your life or whether it's your livelihood, And so it's just so interesting to hear you talk about restructuring and reimagining. The joke has always been in my household, you don't call the police for a fire, do you? You call the firefighters.
Yeah. In where I grew up, the only time the police were there was because somebody was about to get in trouble. So, or somebody had done something wrong. And so, even it's been a while since I've been pulled over for speeding, but, your heart starts to, for me, my heart would start to race, getting pulled over because you're oh, you're in trouble. And so, that, I think it's a natural reaction for people to be scared in those situations. And it's just, and maybe there's some psychological, test, I'm sure that you want that. That's how you keep order, right? That's how you keep order in the communities. You have, enforcers out there, but I don't think we need to do it that way. I think there's a middle ground of, I certainly do not believe we're going to get rid of every bad thing. There's got to be somebody that comes to help. Because we can't control it all. For example, we can't control gun laws, right? And so it is a matter of time, and I hate to say it, that there is going to be another mass shooting somewhere, right? And we need people, and that's, we can't control it. We can't say in Austin, Texas, you're not allowed to own a gun. So there are things outside of our control that will lead to bad kinds of things happening. And we need to know that we have someone to call when those bad things happening. Absolutely. But there needs to be a different way that we think about other things. When, the Sandra Bland getting pulled over, did that have to lead to the end of that? The most recent one, the pursuit that started in Williamson County, Javier Ambler, I believe was his name. Did that have to lead to that? Police officers are so trained to protect themselves and to protect their fellow officers. And, you know, you don't want to be a Monday morning quarterback, but when you look at those situations, you're like, gosh, you know, the guy's like saying he's in pain. Like, why didn't somebody step in and say, hey, you know, let's everyone take a deep breath.
I mean, there's multiple approaches to that, but I think the interesting thing in hearing you express this appropriateness is, I know that Minneapolis has taken a public health approach to attempting to restructure their community. Are you familiar with that in realizing that crime is not itself the issue, it's a symptom of other issues, right? Yeah. So
one of our council members, Natasha Harper Madison, I've actually we talked about the declaring the public health crisis, and I think she's actually working on, I'm not sure, I haven't had a chance to revisit with her while we've been on this break, this so-called break. But
pandemic.
Break about the break. But yeah, I have seen that, and I'm very interested to see what that outcome is. And as we have a new public safety committee, it used to be the judicial committee, and now we've renamed it the public safety committee. And we are going to start having more frequent meetings where we can have these conversations, because that's like what my stump speech, part of that, my stump speech is, we haven't solved the deep-seated issues. We're not solving, and we've used the criminal justice system to try to solve them, and it's not working. And so, you know, if you are prescribed a medication or given a vaccine and it is determined it's not working, you stop taking that medicine. You stop doing what's not working. And that's what this time calls for right now, is exactly that, is re-examining how we have responded to things. Even when the decriminalizing homelessness issue happened, which has been one of the most controversial, aside from, just when I think something's not going to be any more controversial, something else happens. But the big one, there's,
of all things, homelessness.
Yeah.
Homelessness, people, come on. This one should be pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, my most awful Twitter, how should I say this, because this is recorded, people criticizing me, I guess, it's all because of that. They're just so upset, and it's like this, we didn't create a new problem. It's been there. You're just seeing it more. They've come out of literally the woods. I remember when I was a firefighter, we used to go to, I was at the fire station at South First and Ben White, and we used to all the time make calls in the Greenbelt, because people would see smoke and they would think that there was a fire happening, and it was usually like a cooking fire or a warming fire. And we'd go back in those woods, and it was a big camp of homeless people. And so it's like, and that was in 2003. This didn't happen overnight. And so, but that, people would say, oh, well, this is how we connect them to services. When we give them a ticket and then they get warrants and then they, end up in jail, this is how we connect them to services. The same thing was used when we were talking about the juvenile curfew, which is study after study has showed juvenile curfews really just end up putting Black and brown kids in the criminal justice pipeline. Exactly. So many cities have overturned and changed and gotten rid of their juvenile curfew. And we presented this, to our chief, and he at the time was a brand new chief, and he resisted us changing that, and then changed his mind. And we can talk a whole nother show about that. But that was the first time I thought, oh, he is going to be open to. He will be open to learning about these studies and these progressive issues, and I was so grateful that he changed his mind. It wouldn't have mattered because we were going to do it anyway. We had the votes to overturn it anyway. But that it also showed, one thing that would be said was, well, this is how we connect them to services. This is how we help these kids. And we would say, I would say, that's not how we should be connecting kids to services, by arresting them or giving them tickets. Like,
no, and you perpetuate a cycle of trauma, and it's just like, I mean, one of the first things I learned when I moved to Texas was the profits of prisons.
Yeah.
It just like, blew my mind. Like, it's a bona fide like, not bona fide in the sense of legitimized, but it's an industry here, you know? And I watched the dependence of small towns on those prisons for jobs, and that being used coupled with the school to prison pipeline to justify, like, it was very interesting. I'm really curious on, you know, I feel like I have to ask this question, as a Latinx individual, like, how has, from a district that is your majority, you know, how has your experience being on city council as Austin has changed? I'm familiar with Austin. I've been coming here for a long time, and I live here now. And so I'm really curious on your perspective on how Austin is changing, your experience within that role as in your ethnicity, and then you know, how that brought you to this point of running for county attorney.
Sure. So I actually grew up in San Antonio, and I did not know I was a minority because in San Antonio you were not a minority. And I remember my dad was very involved in local politics. He was a firefighter. He was very involved in his union. And so he was very involved in local politics because of that. And I remember watching the national news at night with my family, and you would see these stories about Hispanics being, because that was the term then, was Hispanics being a minority. And I always thought, what are they talking about? We're everywhere. You know, in San Antonio, the police chief was Hispanic, the fire chief, the mayor, Henry Cisneros was the mayor then. All your leaders look like you. And I remember when I moved to Austin how different it was. But I had already gotten culture shock because I went to Texas A&M. And so I had already, you know, gone through the, oh, wow, I am a minority, and started to experience different kinds of treatment that I had never experienced in San Antonio before. And so then moving to Austin, I loved Austin. I had a bunch of friends that went to UT. I knew that I wanted Austin to be my home. I've lived here for 21 years now. It was interesting to see, to talk to Latinos that grew up here, my husband being one of those, and the stories he would tell me. You know, he would say when we would go downtown to 6th Street, they wouldn't let us in some bar sometimes, like him and his Black and brown friends. And I feel bad. I would say, oh, come on. Was it because you were, you know, I did that whole thing. Like, well, that would, like, thinking that never happened in San Antonio. Like, you're, you know, maybe you're imagining that or something. But then I started to see it, you know, I started to see how segregated the city was. And when I moved closer to the fire academy in Southeast Austin, which who would have known I would be the council member that represented that district, you know, years later, is when I got to that very highly concentrated Latino community, felt like at home again. It felt like I was back in San Antonio, and I realized how lucky I was to grow up in a city where I wasn't a minority. I never felt less than, and thankfully I had a lot of that, I guess, confidence going into whatever I chose to go into. So, you know, seeing it at the city side and during the fight for 10-1, and seeing the you know, we're definitely a minority here, and not, you know, learning that there had only been 4 Latinos ever on the Austin City Council at that time, and the gentleman's agreement, which reserved a seat for a Black person, reserved a seat for a Hispanic person, and then even that wasn't respected sometimes. There were times when that seat wasn't saved, and a white person would run in that seat and win. And so it was very eye-opening. And then since my time as a council member, seeing map after map after map about what, regardless of what the issue is, just the inequities. You know, when I was fighting for the health district, the health center in my district, the last round of propositions that passed, thankfully. And there was a map of life expectancy. You look east of 35, and it's significantly less. And so just when you look at, depending on what zip code you live in, determines how long your life will be, right? And then the next report comes out, and it's racial disparities in policing. And and you look at the map again, that heat map, and it's just, if you live on this part of town, you're more likely to get pulled over, you're more likely to get your car searched, you're more likely to get ticketed, you're more likely to get arrested. Just, it was the same, you would see the same map over and over again. And honestly, now that we're talking with the COVID, same map, where we're dealing with decades of inequities and systematic oppression, frankly, and that has just ignited, a passion of mine in changing the system and seeing how hard it was even being in the system to change things. And so, as a council member, we had the health center on the ballot. It was going to be on the ballot, and I started getting calls about, well, it's not polling so well, and you don't want propositions to fail. So maybe we should take that one off and fund it a different way. And it just kind of pissed me off. And I was like, no, like shame on Austin. Because the thinking was, it was the one thing on the ballot that was about a specific part of town. Everything else was like affordable housing everywhere, parks everywhere, urban trails everywhere. And so people go in that ballot box and I like parks. Oh, I like, I use parks. Oh, I like affordable housing. And so there's all these different, public safety is important, but it was the only thing on the ballot that was specific to a part of town. And the worry was from, I guess, the experts, where someone's going to go in that ballot box and say, I don't know where that is. I don't have any connection to that. I'm not going to vote for it. And it had polled the lowest of all the propositions. And I thought, shame on Austin if we cannot see that it is so necessary for a part of town with such huge health disparities and racial disparities in every category, and we can't vote for a health center for them. It stayed there and it passed. And so, there's been time after time I've seen this, even working within the system, trying to change things and seeing that there wasn't a perspective of somebody who understands those issues. And so as I got involved in the judicial committee and started learning about so many racial disparities in our criminal justice system, I thought this was where I could have a big impact and where I could bring a very broad perspective. I haven't been in that office for decades, and I think it's harder to change a system when you're inside the system, because you defend things a lot and you don't want to offend people and step on anybody's toes. And I've also thought about it, when we look for a city manager or we do a nationwide search, because it's important to go outside and have someone to take fresh eyes, look at a system with fresh eyes and say, maybe we could do it this way and change. And I think our 10-1 council did that a lot. It was 10 fresh eyes looking at the city government. And I think we've accomplished a lot of good things because you have that freshness. And I think that's important for this position is to have guys looking at it, not afraid to step on people's toes, but also understand the politics of a position. And, you can't go piss off everyone, obviously, but you also need to stand your ground and do the hard work to change.
I got a question about that, okay? There's been talk for a long time about building a women's prison.
Yeah, and that, that's, we need to do everything in our power to make that not happen. And we shouldn't create more, just like you were talking about there wouldn't be for profit because it's it would be a county prison, but still, I mean, why not invest? Why not use that money to invest in, maternal outcomes for African-American moms and in after-school care and in early childhood development? That same map that I always see, that heat map. It's United Way does this great presentation about early childhood development and how those first 3 years of a child's life is so important. Why not invest in that kind of stuff as opposed to creating cages for human beings? I mean,
right.
We need to do everything in our power to not use our precious and very limited resources for.
I think about that, and I think about how you're talking, and I hear a lot of care ethics, but I also hear like your community was so foundational in making who you are that that's what you're offering, a community-centered approach to changing the system. I think so many times, you talk about this longevity of the way things have gone, and it's right. We've even written laws about laws, right? I mean, we're never supposed to stop evolving, and I like the fact that you talk about not staying comfortable, getting fresh eyes. You need those perspectives in order to help challenge you and help you grow. And I think a lot of people are now getting reinterested in politics because they're realizing they need to grow, they need to challenge, they can't allow things to happen anymore. So that's super awesome. So we have about like almost 15 minutes left, and I do want to make sure we get to questions from our viewers. But I gotta know what you do to like chill, because like that's a lot, like, and you've been doing a lot for a minute, like.
What do? I told you earlier, I went on a mountain bike ride this morning and my legs feel like spaghetti right now. I try to, I say I'm an occasional runner. I used to be more hardcore. I've run a couple of marathons. I just haven't had the time to train recently. And I really found that to help with the stress level and the mental health capacity. I have a great supportive husband who's incredibly supportive, and just a great family and great support system, and wine.
Child, listen. 6:30, boom, I'm in it. I'm ready to go. 6:30 on a Friday.
Charcuterie board, homemade.
And you just go on in, just
yeah.
Nice. I love it. So anybody, if you guys want to ask questions, you're more than welcome to either unmute yourself, or you can drop a question in the chat box and we'll get it answered. I think I have one here already. Someone said that they have video of contractors dumping out the water at the camps.
Oh, please send that to me.
Email, please.
Please email
That's
that.
me. I'm here changing a diaper, so
Okay.
that's why I was on mute. But it's Rebecca Steingut, so check. I'll email you the link on our Facebook page. It's Austin Mutual Aid who's sending the water out to those camps. So
Okay.
appreciate you for taking that so seriously.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. A really awesome comment we have here is, it sounds like you want to make things better off for the officers too. And I think, that's also what I heard, is they're humans, and they need correction, error, and learning and comfort and respect also, because it has to come from both sides, so just hearing you talk about that, especially in that situation, I could hear when you talked about going out to that call that you've also been in a situation where you've gone out to a call and known you've not had needed to be there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that, this tough conversation came up too when we were talking about the police contract. And I remember saying, it's so unfortunate that it feels like you're in one camp or the other, that you're either in the Black Lives Matter camp or you're pro-police. And it's unfortunate that it has become this, like, these two camps, because it really is a middle ground. Like, for me, and I feel like I feel a lot of that middle ground is that I absolutely understand we need to address police brutality and racism, but I also do have a lot of respect for people who answer the call to public service, and because I've known them. And what I've heard on the other side is none of them are good, because even the good ones have been complicit in and I totally understand that, but I don't know if there have been situations where every single police officer has seen something bad and hasn't said something, or hasn't, done the right thing. And I mentioned I had my sister's a police officer, and she's married to a police officer. So I have immediate family that I know are good people. They're good people, and they only They only took that job because they wanted to serve their community and they wanted to help. They both are police officers in small towns, and that's a really different situation because they're so much more invested in the community when you live in the town and when you know everybody. And I think that's a big difference in Austin is a lot of police officers, I don't want to say a lot because I don't know what the number is, but and firefighters too, they don't live in Austin. And that could be, well, it's expensive to live here and you have the right to live wherever you want to live. But I certainly do believe that there is a middle ground, and like we've been put to these two sides, and the Austin Police Association, the union, has, done some, I don't know who is advising them, but they have just done some really kind of ridiculous things. And essentially what I certainly believe is act like bullies. And it's like, don't you see that's what people are mad about? Like, they're mad about feeling bullied, and they're mad about threats, to their safety. And when the police association recently, the most recent one, was they're going to tell if Brian Manley doesn't reinstitute like things like the use of tear gas and certain types of equipment, they're going to tell their officers not to go to work. And I was just like, that's not the solution here, guys and gals.
It still blows me away though. Also, is because it's not just bullying, it's not just threats. Like, people's lives are actually being lost. So at what point does it incite that this needs to change? Like, that's where my curiosity and my lack of understanding is. It's like, how much the scales need to tip for you to be like, you know what? This don't work no more.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I do appreciate the humanization of that, because it is in your community, it is close to you, but there's so much that needs to, I'm in the Black Lives Matter camp, hands down. You could tell what my favorite color is. But no buts. I kind of feel like when it comes to the whole situation, there's a mountain, and I need to see police departments and police unions come up over that mountain for that trust to be reinstilled.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's not just bullying, it's like a pure assault. And until I see them come up over and surrender and like really have that relationship, which that's what Manley needs to learn. Like, they haven't wrapped around the fact that tear gas doesn't create relationship,
Yeah.
So it's just, it's just really interesting for you to say that, but there are good people who do right, but it's really hard to overcome these instituted things. I have a question here from Cecilia. She says, you've advocated for ending enforcement of low-level drug charges. Could you speak to the steps that are needed to happen in order for that to go in place in Austin? So, could you please help us out with that?
Sure. So there's kind of like two levels to enforcement. There's the laws that the police enforce, which happens at the ticketing and arresting stage. And then there's the enforcement on the prosecution side. And so the way on the county attorney side is you just say first day in office. And I can't remember, I think it was it Larry Krasner? He's been getting a lot of media attention. He's the DA in Philadelphia, I believe, who had been a defense attorney and is incredibly progressive. And on his first day in office, there was like this 10-page memo where he flat out said, here are the things I'm not going to prosecute. And that was one of them. So for me, that would be one of the first things on day one. You just say, I'm not going to prosecute these. And then that's it on the county attorney side. We tried to do that through the city council's policy power, which is, it's hard for people to understand that part of it because and it's hard for me to understand sometimes, frankly, too, because I feel like we told them not to do this. Why are they still doing it? We have a strong city manager form of government. And so the city manager side is they administrate the policy that we put into place, but that doesn't always happen that way. So the legislature had created a loophole unintendedly with marijuana specifically when they legalized hemp. And the difference between hemp and the pot that people smoke is a level of THC. So when they legalized hemp, it was hard to tell whether something was the legal stuff or the illegal stuff unless you test it. and jurisdictions did not have the testing equipment. And so because of that, our local DA and county attorney said, we're not going to prosecute low-level pot because we don't have the testing equipment. But the reality is they could have said that already, because when the majority of Texans, of Americans believe that low-level pot should be legal, and in some states it already is, it could have been a policy call made. And so because us as city council members knew that they weren't being prosecuted, we thought we were wasting resources. Why are our police officers still giving out tickets and still arresting some people for 4 ounces or less of, this is specifically about marijuana. And so we did a resolution, which is our kind of like bills, so to speak. And I was a co-sponsor on it, and we directed our chief to direct his police officers to not ticket or arrest for that low-level drug charge. And the very next day, and there's been a series of these just direct opposition to the policy we've tried to create. Very next day went on television and said it is still the law in Texas, and he was still going to ticket and arrest people for low-level marijuana. And that's a long string of issues that many of us, or I know 5 of us, have publicly said that we have with our current chief. I think he's a good person. I just don't think he's the leadership we need in this department right now. But so we try to do. Go ahead.
It's just that, and it's like I'm hearing you say this, but then I'm also hearing you see the maps. Yeah, you're going to prosecute low-level possession, but you're going to arrest primarily Black and brown people.
Exactly. So we tried to do it on the side, it didn't work, and that's why the next county attorney, because that testing equipment's going to become available, and the way Texas can not force but enable jurisdictions to do certain things is because after local prosecutors said they weren't going to enforce it, Abbott wrote a letter saying it is still the law in Texas. We'll get you, we'll get you the testing equipment. So it's a matter of time before the state will say, when they want us to enforce certain things, it becomes a funded mandate, as most, usually it's unfunded mandates from the state. And so it's a matter of time before that testing equipment becomes available, which means jurisdictions can start prosecuting it. And the next county attorney will decide if that testing equipment becomes available, am I going to prosecute low-level pot? And if I'm elected, I will not prosecute it, in addition to dismissing. So all those cases that are not being prosecuted right now, they can come back. So whoever's in that office can decide, let's start, we got our testing equipment, let's start prosecuting all these cases. And I would also dismiss all those cases because they are not public safety. That is not a threat to public safety, and they significantly affect brown and Black. Those kinds of crimes significantly affect brown and Black communities more.
So let me see if I have any questions left. I have one question for you. Last one, okay. Is there a difference between fairness and justice?
I think that there is. And I think because it's a subjective thing, right? What's fair to me is not fair to the Austin Police Association, for example. But I think justice should always be the same, and that and justice is not always doesn't always mean that it's you didn't violate any law, because there are laws that are unjust. And so so I think it is probably incredibly a subjective thing. But for me, justice should always be the same. Fairness is such a subjective thing. For depending on who you're asking. And I think, we've been talking a lot about equity, and there's this awesome visual, and I don't remember who came up with this, but it shows equality versus equity. And it shows it's a tall, I don't know if y'all have seen it, it's a tall kid and a short kid. And equality is they're trying to look over a fence, and they each get the same size box to look over. So the tall kid can look over, but the little short kid still can't look over. And then equity is the short person gets the bigger box. And because at the end of the day, you want people to have the same opportunities. And some people, because of the color of their skin or where they grew up, they don't have the same access to that. And so I guess I've stopped. I don't know why, when you said fairness, it made me think of equity really quick. And what?
No, that's awesome. That's one of the big things, in my education, endeavor to people of telling them, no, stop saying equality, stop saying equality. You don't want equality, you don't want equity. I've used that graphic. The one I like is it's kind of like Shel Silverstein, and it's a tree that's leaning over, and it's a little apple tree, and it has the tall kid on the leaning side and the short kid on the higher side, and equity is giving each child an appropriate ladder to get an apple. And so, yeah, it's just, it's one of those things that, again, like, you can learn so much in just a language shift. And that's why, like, I so appreciate you defining the differences between a district attorney, a state county, a county general, because as people get this education, you know, I'm fortunate I had an awesome civics teacher. Like, I had a great civics teacher, made it super relatable, super engaging, but I know that isn't the majority of the experience. And as you learn about these different things going on, especially as the news and print and newspapers and things, it's hard to keep track. And if we're going to change, we got to start micro to macro, right? And so I'm just super fortunate that you gave us this time, like, you know, and the fact that we were matching, honey, like, totally yes. I mean, I look forward to seeing you do amazing things, and most definitely want to have you back on. But I think this is the beginning of some real conversations that we're starting to have in Austin, you know, and I appreciate you having gone through the circuit, through the grinder per se, to get to this point and still want to commit to doing more. So, you know, you're so deeply appreciated.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all taking the time to learn about the campaign, and it's funny that you mentioned earlier feeling like you have to fit a certain role, because even as I was getting dressed, I was like, I wonder if the leopard's going to be too much, because I didn't really know who the group was, and I'm like, it's Friday. I'm gonna wear
Honey, animal print and glitter are colors. What are you talking about?
That's right.
Seriously. Cecilia said she lives in your district and she's gonna vote early for you. That's a huge thing.
Thank you,
guys. I'm gonna drop her website into the chat box right now. Please, please, please learn more. Please tell your friends about this. This is gonna be up on our YouTube, and we'll get this to your people too, so you can share. But I mean it, guys, if you're upset about what's going on and you're stuck at home or you can't get home, there's so many different modalities of learning and getting to know these people. And I kind of like the fact that now, because of this pandemic, we get to have these intimate conversations. This is a person, a good person who's done the work, who does the deed, has the grit, loves animal print, but also, you know, is really talking about things that really benefit the Black and Brown communities. So if you really want to focus on that and commit your life to doing that voting, if you have the right, use it, please. And also go to the website, talk to your friends, bring your family around, wear the red lipstick. It'll get you all together, I promise.
It does.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I look forward to great things. Take care, okay?
Thank you. Bye-bye.